Buyer backs out. Seller's mad. There's thousands of dollars in earnest money sitting on the table. So who gets it? Is it the buyer, the seller, or does it just disappear like a New Year's resolution? If you're buying or selling a home, you'll want to stick around because this little deposit can turn into a big drama. I'm Jana Classy, local realtor here in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. Today we're diving into a hot topic that causes more confusion than you'd think: earnest money. What it is, why it matters, and who gets to keep it if a house deal goes sideways. Whether you're a buyer putting in an offer or a seller trying to protect your time and investment, knowing how earnest money works can save you a lot of stress. So here's the situation. A buyer puts down an earnest money deposit. It's a good faith gesture that says, I'm serious about buying your home. It's usually held by a third party, and in this area, that's the title company or attorney's office. But what happens if the deal doesn't close? Maybe the financing falls through, an inspection turns up issues, or the buyer simply backs out. That's where things get tricky. Suddenly, both the buyer and seller may feel entitled to that money, and that's when the finger pointing starts. So let's break down what determines who gets the earnest money. It all comes down to the contract and the contingencies in the contract. Most real estate contracts include built-in protections for the buyer, like financing, appraisal, home inspection, or things like the sale of their current home. If the buyer backs out for a legitimate reason covered by a contingency, they'll get their earnest money back. No questions asked. But, and this is a big but, if the buyer just changes their mind after contingencies have been removed, the seller might be entitled to keep that money. In some cases, both parties agree to cancel the deal, split the deposit, or return it in full. But if there's a dispute, that money stays put until both sides agree or a court decides. Let me give you a real life example. I had a buyer using a VA loan to purchase a home. Everything looked good until the appraisal came back, and it wasn't about the value. The appraiser flagged several code violations, things like electrical issues, missing handrails, that the lender required before approving the loan. Now, per the contract, those lender required repairs were considered mandatory, but the seller said, no, I'm not going to fix anything. And the buyer, he didn't feel comfortable spending a large amount of money to repair a home he didn't even own yet, which makes total sense, right? So the deal fell apart. The repairs were required for the buyer's loan, and the contract said if they weren't done, the deal would be void. Once the seller refused to fix them and the buyer didn't want to pay out of pocket, the loan couldn't move forward and the contract was no longer enforceable. Since it wasn't the buyer's fault, he got his earnest money back. That's really a great example of how language in the contract guides us in how that earnest money deposit is handled. So, to wrap it up, earnest money is meant to protect both sides. If the deal falls through due to a valid contingency, the buyer usually gets the money back. If the buyer walks away without cause, or for reasons not covered in a contract contingency, the seller may keep it. And if there's a dispute, that money could be tied up for months until both sides agree and sign a release or a court decides. So always read the contract carefully. Work with an experienced agent who could guide you through those details. And I'm curious, have you ever been part of a deal that fell through? It's very stressful, I know. Did you get your earnest money deposit back, or did things get messy? I'd love to hear some stories on that. So do that. So let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other videos for more tips on buying and selling real estate here in West Virginia. And I'm Jana Classy again, and I thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Have a great week.